are responsible for maintaining Museveni in power. There's no question about that. Israel, to a degree, allows security equipment, surveillance equipment to be sold to Uganda's government as well. Regime, both militarily and through money. About $1 billion a year goes to the government, and that helps prop up the government. Now, as Dr. Jingle said before, we don't really need the outside money, do we? It's used as a means of perpetuating those in power that outsiders favor. And that's the problem with foreign aid, and African governments and societies have fallen victim to it. Aid is a weapon used by the West, primarily. Our aid is used for political purposes. Now, all of that being said, the U.S. is not an evil regime. It's not going to send troops in to keep Museveni in power. It sponsors him because of a somewhat racial attitude in the U.S. State Department that African governments need, African societies need a strong man to rule. Let's face it, there is this attitude prevailing in the West, primarily in the U.S. and Britain, that Africans need a strong man. Never a strong woman, by the way, a strong man. And this is fundamentally a racial conception of how the West sees power in Africa. It's wrong. We've seen many, many examples of democracy in Africa. And it's fundamentally biased and ignorant. It is a racial point of view the U.S. practices. But the U.S. ultimately is not going to use force to keep Museveni or any other ally like that in power. If a democratic election clearly demonstrates he's lost authority, the U.S. will not stand in the way. I don't speak for the U.S., I'm just analyzing U.S. policy. Don't mistake that, I'm not part of the U.S. government. But ultimately, what role should the Ugandan people play is the question. Now you put the question as what role supplementary to the process can you play? Well, there's, I think, the error, if you don't mind my saying so. Your role in Uganda as Ugandans is not supplementary. Your role is primary. Bobby's role is primary. My role is supplementary. All right, that's what we have to change. We have to change this quiescent obeisance and the notion that somehow outsiders have the primary duty to make this change. I'm a catalyst. But a catalyst makes a reaction. That reaction must be Ugandan. So what role can Ugandans play? Not as supplements, but as citizens who are demanding their rights. Once we change that mental perspective, we change everything. That's the whole point of Bobby's campaign and the NUP's campaign. What role can we play? Well, there's a multiplicity of roles. First of all, Uganda is broken down into a set of local governments. Every town and district has a chair. Is that correct? Yes. Those chairs are often independent people. They're not all national resistance movement toadies. Many of them are quite independent. Many of them, probably a majority, support the NUP. You can go to your chair. You can go to your district meetings and speak. You're not going to get arrested for speaking against torture and against the regime. Imagine if 5 million Ugandans went to district meetings all over the country on a given day and spoke about torture. Imagine the impact of that on the regime. That suddenly every district meeting, which the regime can't shut down, as people complain about torture and abuse, one thing that can be done by Ugandans. Painless, simple thing, but immensely powerful. That's the first thing. To start to speak out again as citizens. Saying, I have the primary right to be heard. That's the first step. That is not a supplement, that is the primary move. And then the primary move is to organize another 100,000 person gathering. Not even if Bobby is there. Organize it in your own district. Organize a meeting, a public meeting. Hold public meetings in every district, in every city, in every town, in every county. Talking about change. Have a public meeting to talk about changing the Constitution. To get rid of military jurisdiction, which is what is used to arrest people. Have a simple meeting like that. Every district can hold a meeting to discuss whether the Constitution should be amended to eliminate military jurisdiction over the citizen. No one's going to get arrested. That will have immense power. Do this over and over again, and begin to organize public meetings and protests. Yes, in some occasions, the government might react with violence, but they can only do that once or twice and on a small scale. And that would be tragic, but people are killed anyway. Far better to begin to assert rights as citizens. I hope I've given some positive examples. There are a myriad of things that can be done. But the first step is to get over the notion that we are, in Uganda, only a subsidiary of this effort. Ugandans are the primary effort. Remember the Arab Spring movements? Those were internal movements. Now, they weren't entirely successful. Some governments later became repressive. But they were not led from the outside. They were led internally. And we have a movement, and it's a legitimized movement. I want to say one more thing and then I'll close. Uganda was given a great benefit by Britain when Britain left. That benefit was the rule of law. Uganda has a court system. It has lawyers who are well trained. Most are committed to law. Some have become afraid and become tools of the government. But most have within them that core of belief in law. I've met Ugandan lawyers, and they're as competent and thoughtful and well-trained as American lawyers or British lawyers. Uganda was given this legal system. That tradition still exists. You were given a parliamentary system, and that tradition still exists. It's been abused, it's been straightened and foreclosed a bit, but it is still there. All of these tools exist to be used. The district government system is widespread. It is for you to use. Uganda was given an educational system. There are fine universities. There's a well-educated component to the people. Use these strengths. They're there and they're sitting there waiting to be used. They can also be used politically. And so I would say, in closing, the rule of law is what we started with here. The rule of law is what must propel. Remember how Museveni came to power? He came to power through what? Guns. He said, I'm a liberal, getting rid of a dictator, but he came to power through a gun. Bobby Wine doesn't have a gun. The NUP does not have a gun. It is a political movement based on the right under the rule of law to be heard. And that is ultimately its strength. Now, we're sitting here peacefully and safely in Arlington next to Washington. Could we have this meeting in Uganda? We might right now. I don't know. We might be able to right now. One could try and see what happens. If you're unwilling to try, then you can't get freedom. Freedom can be taken from the point of a gun, like Museveni has done. But it's also easily lost by fear. And so I would encourage people to leave here with the message that the strength in this movement is much stronger than Museveni and his government. And remember that and take that with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce, for that powerful speech. And I think we sometimes forget that the legal system is long. When you file a case, it takes time. So let's all be patient. The evidence is there, and we know we'll get to the promised land one day. Just one comment. If you have a question or comment, because we're only going to take 3 questions going forward. So if you do have a question, please write it down, provide your email, we'll collect it and give it to the specific speaker, and they will get back to you. So we want to go through the program fast today. But
one ask a question for the general public.
I'll come and talk to you, mister. So, right now I would like to invite the Madam Vice President of the Diaspora here in the US, Madam Leila from Boston.
People power, our power, NUB, everywhere. Thank you so much. Mr. Bruce, thank you so much for that very insightful presentation about ICC. Mr. President, we welcome you, our honorable members of parliament, all the presenters around, and all the members in the house. My name is Leila Mutasa, and I am the Vice Team Leader, USA Chapter. And thank you all for coming around today. We really had that important message about the ICC. Personally, I feel re-energized. I hope you are all. Yes, I know we have not yet reached where we want to be, but we have made a very big progress. Very big process, exactly. Progress is there, and you can see light at the end of the tunnel. We thank you so much. I would like to introduce to you our next presenter, and that's Ms. Kim Paul. She's going to talk about culture as the new currency, empowering minds, decolonizing education, and diaspora as valuable allies in upward mobility and reconciliation of Uganda. Ms. Kim Paul is a visionary leader in social transformation through art. As the chief visionary of the Artisan Conference Philosophy under the Teaching Artists Institute, she spearheads efforts to connect sustainable development with art culture in emerging economies. With a strong international presence, Kim and her team of teaching artists operate in the USA, Ghana, Liberia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and the Gambia, working on the art for social transformation, teaching artistry in action, curriculum and workbook. Please help me welcome Ms. Kim Paul.
I was born by the river in a little tent, and oh, just like a version. It's been a long time coming, but I know. I'm joined by brothers and sisters from Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone because they are also using their art as a tool to heal their societies.
Thank you very much, Kim. People power. People power. I call myself a comrade because we all belong to the same struggle. Imagine for a second, we have a sudden death of Mussolini. It's not by our revolution, it's not by our violence. Today, we're witnessing the sudden death of Mussolini. He's dead, right? Okay, now, the big question is, can Uganda rise? We're here today because we believe in liberation. We're here because we believe that culture is the new currency. The fight we have is not about Mussolini, it's not about dictatorship. It's about the spirit of Mussolini. And that spirit has become the African spirit in all African nations. It's about corruption, it's about self. It's about neglecting our people, it's about dividing ourselves. It's about using our resources meant for the greater good for ourselves and oppressing our people. That is a spirit we need to fight. And we cannot fight that spirit, but we need to replace that spirit with what I call the new African liberation movement. Culture is a new currency. What do we believe in? Who are we? What are our values? What are our principles? The culture of Museveni goes beyond his 37-year rule in Uganda. He became president when I was 4 years old. Amazing, right? Crazy. But every story you hear in Uganda with a 37-year-old dictator, you can get that same story in Sierra Leone, and we don't have anyone who's been president for even 15 years. It goes beyond dictatorship. We're fighting a culture. That's the culture of Museveni. His influence on the continent, his principles, his values have been a seed of bad leadership on our continent. We need to rise as Africans, and we need to replace that culture with the Bobby Wine culture. That's a culture of hope. It is not about Bobby Wine as a person, but it's about the culture of standing up. It's about the culture of saying that I have to give it up all to fight for what is right. It's about the culture that I have to stand for what is right when no one is watching. It's about a culture of unity. It's about a culture of believing in Uganda, believing in an African. It's about a culture of hope. It's about a culture of ensuring that Ugandans can live in Uganda and fulfill their potentials. That is the culture we need. We say culture is a new currency. So we are not fighting, we are not here to say we are fighting Museveni, that we want to fight him with the guns. But yes, if he came by the guns, he can be fought by the guns. But I will tell you this, in our generation, our gun is different. We are living in the AI generation. Culture is a currency. Our culture is our bullet, is our weapon. We are going to use to liberate our nation, Uganda. I call it our nation because I'm an African. And I believe that every African shares the Ugandan story. We say culture is a new currency. And that is what we need to be, that is what we need to do. We are using this culture not only to fight and defeat Museveni, but we want to use this culture to buy him out. We want to use this culture to defeat him. We want to use this culture to bring down the long stance of dictatorship, because we believe that it has affected our continent a lot. Again, we ask, what are we using? It's about the emotions. For 37 years, don't we have brave, intelligent, and strong men from Uganda? For 37 years, we've had people in different forms and shapes coming like Bobby Wine, right? For 37 years. But this is it. It's a marathon and not a sprint. We need to endure. And we need to often tell ourselves that if we have to take the spirit, it starts with self. We need a personal approach to ensure that we win, and we need a personal approach. Our leader, our president, Bobby Wine, is seated here today because he took a personal journey. So you want to ask yourself for a moment, why are you part of the National Unity Platform? Are you part of this platform because you want to follow Bobby Wine? Are you part of this platform because you only believe in his leadership? What is a pain to you? Are you part of this platform because you think that enough should be enough? Are you part of this platform to say, even if I wake up tomorrow and Bobby Wine says that I'm no longer going to lead this movement, we are going to continue with this fight? It should be personal. That is the spirit we need. Because the more we have that individual spirit and we come together as a collective, that is how we will win. Culture is a new currency. It's powerful. What stories are we telling our kids? What are we teaching them? What art are we using to build our communities? How are we using this art to ensure that we come together as a community? How do we develop ourselves? Do we care about ourselves? Do we love ourselves? A house divided cannot stand. How united are we in our unity of the National Unity Platform? How united are we? Are we interested in getting out Mussolini because we want to be the next generation of corrupt African leaders? Is that our intent? We have to keep asking ourselves now and then. But we need to be intentional. And we need to be resolute. We need to be radical in our approaches to ensuring that we build a generation of people who are fearless. But not only people who are fearless, but people who are determined to win. People who are determined to succeed. And with culture as a currency, we can and we will buy out Mussolini. Thank you.
It is in my language tribe, which is VIOLANCE. I am Diaspora and I am from Côte d'Ivoire, the most hospitable country in the world. So I am a teacher and I'm also a singer. I have noticed that my students were not motivated about learning English. So I decided to use my artistry, which is music, to teach my students. And I've conducted this research work and I saw that it worked. It works. They started loving English. They started liking this language. And I also use music to promote peace and non-violence in my community. So you can understand that music or art played a very significant role in the building. And as part of my professional development experience, I am working with the Teaching Artists Institute. At the Teaching Artists Institute, I am learning and understanding about the importance of African arts, and also the preservation of languages that are disappearing in Africa. So I am working now on the project, which is 2 books. Me and Kim, we are working on this project. It's a book for students from elementary school. These books will be written in 4 languages. Baoulé, which is the language of my tribe in Côte d'Ivoire, also English, and also Swahili, Luganda, and because I'm also bilingual, I speak French, I speak English, I speak my mother tongue, so this book will also be written in French for our students, for our children. So, I take this opportunity to invite you on an event, a community event that will take place on the 27th of August. I will be performing this song that you just heard, Or What They Were, and I will also cook, especially for my country, which we call sauce jublé with futu. This is done with banana or yam with okra, dried okra soup. So you are all invited because this day will be the release of the 2 books and the day when I will perform this song, Or What They Were, which means Here We Save You. So thank you for having me here today. I'm learning a lot here in the United States during this program with the Teaching Artists Institute. Thank you again.
So the reason that I invited Prextica to be here with us today is because it's important to know that we're still living our real lives as we go on this journey towards liberation. And language is so important. Are you writing this story? Even this story. We were so inspired when we saw that there was a documentary about the man and his music. That is the culture. But each one of you are part of this movement. Are you writing your story right now, today? The fact that you were in this room, in Luganda or in English, in Rachiga. What are the languages of Uganda? These are the tools of your liberation. Take a stand and say that we will define us for us. The U.S. is not going to save you. The West is not going to save you. The ICC is not going to save you. Culture is the new currency, and through our culture, we will save ourselves. Thank you again. My name is Kim Pruitt.
That was a powerful discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for loving Uganda. Thank you so much for loving Africa. Thank you for loving the blackness in us. And thank you so much for the unity. And at this moment, you all have women. I think when we watched the movie yesterday, we saw the passion that Mrs. Chaplin had. Women, let's get up. We should be part of the movement. We should be scared. She did her job. We should all do our jobs. And at this moment, I would like to introduce Mr. Kareem to come and give us a brief history of where we're going to be talking.
Thank you. My name is Kareem Tambi, and our next topic is going to be Diaspora as effective advocates, shaping the U.S.-African relations and policies towards Africa. And our presenter is going to be Mr. Melvin Ford. Melvin is a founder and president of the Constituency of Africa. He is also the board member of the African Society. Mr. Melvin has worked so hard when it comes to the U.S. African policy. He's one of the people, the activists of the AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Program. He also helped shape the PEPFAR program. He is also one of the people who wrote the President Obama's Young African Leaders Initiative. On top of that, recently he has been working so hard with the Biden administration for us as the African diaspora, and an executive order was established for the President's Advisory Council on African Advisory Engagement. So may you join me as we welcome Mr. Melvin Ford.
Good afternoon, people. It's great to be here. I've always been to be the president of the Great Bottom Line. I first met him, he was a young boy. And he's still at it. So now he's a young man. And I appreciate his determination. Basically, my name is Melvin Foote. I'm the president of an organization called the Constituency for Africa. And if I have a claim to fame, I've been working on Africa my whole adult life. So nearly 50 years, I was working on Africa. I started out as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ethiopia, Eritrea. I worked 3 years in Somalia as country director for an organization called Africare. And I was brought back to Washington in 1994 to educate Americans about Africa and to prove the over many years, shaping U.S. policy for Africa. The Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which is the U.S. trade bill with Africa. We did all the groundwork, we pushed it, and we got the U.S. government to change how we looked at Africa from aid to trade. We also, when President Bush came to power, it was during the time of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And we lobbied the administration. We said we want $3 billion for HIV/AIDS in Africa. George Bush just to the microphone and said $19 billion for HIV/AIDS in Africa. Even we were shocked at that. So we were pushing $3 billion. Bush said $19 billion. Whoa. President Obama came up with when he came to power in 2008, he sent his envoy to me. He said, what do you think I should work on in Africa? Because the U.S. economy had crashed. The Republicans had really crashed the economy. They had made the U.S., so welcome to the White House, Mr. Black Man. You don't have no money. And Obama followed George W. Bush. So $19 billion for HIV/AIDS, $5 billion Millennium Challenge account. Here come Obama with nothing in his pocket. And of course the Africans got mad at Obama. Hey brother, why aren't you gonna do more than Bush? So he sent the guy to me and said, no, what do you think I can do for 1 or 2 years to buy some time? And so I wrote a paper and I said, don't spend your time chasing Mugabe, Villa, Museveni, and all the old guys. Don't spend your time chasing those guys. Spend your time on the young ones coming up. And that became what we know as the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI. So, my job is advocacy. My job is to move the United States to do good things for Africa. It's not a job of celebration. It's not really a protest. It's a technical way that you can move the United States to do things for Africa. And that's my job, right? Let me say, I've been to Uganda in 1994 when we were working on the African Growth and Opportunity Act, we toured Africa. And we stopped in Kampala. And we met with Museveni and his government. This is 1994. He's still in power. Wow. But I can say that Uganda is a beautiful country, as you all know. It's the pearl of Africa, as you all know. So let's don't say everything is bad about Uganda. Uganda are beautiful people, very smart people. All of you are smart. I don't have any questions about that. When I first started talking about Africa, the first African I understood was Idi Amin. You guys have a problem with Uganda. You like these guys who are strong and who, dominate. Culture got to be changed. Let me say, in America, the United States, most Americans don't know much about Africa. When I first went to Africa, I told my father I'm going to Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer. He said, boy, you're going to eat by a lion. I didn't know. And I thought that Tarzan, this white man who with a program with a white man in the jungle, he talked to the animals. When I first went to Africa, I thought Tarzan would be at the airport, taking us to the village. That's what I thought about Africa. So most Americans don't know anything about Africa. Most Americans, 95%, if you say, I'm from Uganda, they won't know what you're talking about. They will have no idea about Uganda. This is most Americans. Here in Washington, we tend to know more about Africa because we're more international. But you go to Nebraska, you go out to Oregon, you go to Illinois, you go other places, say, I'm from Uganda. They won't even know what you're talking about. So the first thing you got to realize is that Americans don't know your country. Now, the other thing what we don't realize is that African Americans, people like me, my people came to America by way of the slave trade. You know, chains. We came to America to trade. So when we think about this country, don't think we're happy. You know, a lot of Africans come here, oh, this place is beautiful, look at the White House. Oh, look at all the food they eat. Oh, this is a great country. You black people should be happy. We ain't happy. We're not happy. You think you're mad about Mussolini? We're mad about America. So don't misunderstand that. Now, your biggest advocacy in this country, the biggest people who can support you are people like me, people of my color. We love Africa, and I personally think that we as African Americans, we're more Pan-African than anybody in Africa. You know? We don't care if you're from Cape Town, or you're from Nairobi, or you're from Lagos. We don't care. We love Africa, and we love African people, period. So, understand that about us, you know. We are Pan-Africans. We also like Africans in Jamaica. We like Africans in Trinidad. I just came back from Cuba to talk to the Africans. So we are Pan-Africans, okay? So it's not like we over here going to pick and choose. We like these Africans, and we don't like those Africans. We like all Africans. Is that working? See, this is a problem with America. They'll block your microphone. If they don't like what you say, I don't know if they do that in Uganda, but they do that here. Let me say also that the United States Congress, as I said, Americans don't know much about Africa. The U.S. Congress don't know much about Africa, including the Congressional Black Caucus. The black members who are in the U.S. Congress, if you say, okay, name anything about Uganda, they wouldn't be able to do it. So your first challenge is how do you educate Americans about Uganda? You guys are the advocates. Your job is bigger than you think it is. And it's more than just a celebration. It's more than putting on a nice red hat. Your job is tough. You're educating people about something they don't know about. Now also know that the rest of the world, including the United States, only thing we want from Africa, we want your gold, we want your diamonds, we want your oil, we want your timber, we want everything, but we don't want you. You know, if you think this country is going to support you because, oh, they're good people, no way. They're only looking at the resources. I'm looking at Niger right now. I'm talking about everybody talking about Niger, the coup in Niger. You know, that coup is about uranium. It's about gold. It ain't about the people. They don't care less what kind of government you got. In fact, if you got a dictator, it's better for us. Because we can just go talk to the dictator, cut our deal, and that's that. So your job is bigger than you think it is. It really is about how do you mobilize support for Uganda. My mother always told me, she said, son, don't agonize, organize. You know, don't just get mad. Do something about it, you know. And I say that in the sense that, okay, I have figured it out. I know how to move the United States government. I went to Cuba 2 weeks ago. The U.S. got an embargo on Cuba. It's horrible. Cuba is about as far away from the United States as Philadelphia, or it's very close. You know, why are we strangling Cuba? And the people that we're hurting are the women, the children, you know, the everyday kind of citizens strangled because of the U.S. policy on Cuba. Now, you know, I went to Cuba, and I'm going to change the policy. I'm going to change the policy. I'm going to get Joe Biden to say something different. It may not happen in 6 months or 1 year, but it's going to happen. And that's the kind of attitude you've got to have. Now, in the case of Uganda, quite frankly, God is going to say something about this. He's not going to be president for 200 years. It ain't going to happen. You know? It ain't going to happen. So my advice to you is don't agonize about Mussolini. You got to start worrying about his son a little bit, because the son is acting like he wants to be the president, you know? And then you got to figure out how you want about changing the paradigm. It's a how question. It's not a get mad question. It's not a social question. It's a how question. How are you going to do it, you know? And that's where I think. Now here in the United States, I think that you guys will benefit from linking up with people like myself, with African Americans. Again, we don't know about Uganda. You know, there's 54 countries in Africa. I've been to 45. I speak some Amharic, I speak Tigrinya. So when they say, what is an African American? Me. I'm an African American, you know? So you need to figure out how do you foster. It seemed to me that we ought to be talking about a one-day roundtable with some of your top leaders to talk strategy. Now, what is your strategy for the United States? You know, this is not a loud conversation. It's a closed-door conversation. What is your strategy to mobilize support for Uganda and the United States? That's a how question. Now, I'd love to see the young people in the room. I think that the young people got to realize you're not going to be. I was young one time. I mean, I used to call what they call hip hop. That was me. But what happened? Eventually, your hair turned gray. That's the CIA or what? CIA? I think you don't like what I got to say. That's what I think. I may have a problem when I get outside. They'll knock on my door. Say, we didn't like what you had to say. But I think what I'm more interested in, I think this is a really positive gathering. It's always important to bring people together to encourage us. That's important. But there also needs to be a meeting of about 25 people, not 100, 25 maximum. There need to be half of them need to be women, a third of them need to be young people. You know, I'm telling you what it needs to look like. The room needs to be looking like that. Because Africans tend to like to have meetings where only the men are talking. You know, you guys know how you are. But this room needs to be half women, half some young, some old, some are scholars, some are grassroots organizers. They're coming up with a strategy really to move the ball forward. What do you want to do about Uganda is the question. What do you want to do about Uganda is the question. So if you want to do such a meeting, call me. I'm ready to work with you on what's next step. I don't have much more to say. I was in Nigeria 2 months ago for the Global African Diaspora Summit. Global African Diaspora Summit. And 60 countries were represented at that conference in Abuja. The follow-up conference is committed to be in Uganda in 2024. I don't know if you guys know that. Your minister for diaspora or whatever stood up and said Uganda is going to hold the next summit. So I'm thinking I'm going to be in Uganda in 2024, if not before. I don't even know who your ambassador in Washington is. I don't even know who the ambassador is. I met the previous ambassador somewhere at a reception. Uganda got to do a better job of engaging America. He's the ambassador? I didn't know that. I always thought you were just a good guy. But the people's ambassador. People's ambassador. I'm talking about the one that they sent from Kampala who comes like this and drive a big car and look at the big house. Big man. Big man. This guy's not looking up to me. He's a big man. I need to be ambassador. So, I'm going to leave you with the fact that don't agonize, organize, you know. I'm happy to be here. It's always good to see Bobby Wine. He's one of the more decent human beings I know. And he's a stand up. He's a stand up guy. We were together in Baltimore at the State of the Black Pearl Summit. And Ron Daniels is in the building, but I'm in another meeting right now. So Ron is running that building. He'll be back now. You'll see him. But Bobby came and was really among the people. You know, it wasn't like he was, he's us. He's the right guy. And I think one day he will be president of Uganda. I And Dr. President of Uganda, how about the head of the African Union? To me, which would be better? You know, the guy we got over there now, we need an AU, we need an AU chairperson who stands up and gets stuff done. I'm looking for African leaders who are ready to lead, not just talk about it, not just get bad. You know, I want African leaders who are going to lead. And my message to the young people, we need more Nelson Mandelas out here. We really do. We need more Nelson Mandelas to stand up. If we're going to solve the problem. The problem with Uganda is not limited to Uganda. The problem with Uganda is limited to black people. And I don't care where you are in the world, you got the same problem that you guys are arguing about with Mussolini and hell, we got all kinds of problems here with our leadership, you know? So we need young people to grow up and commit themselves to real leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Melvin, for talking to us about the advocacy for change, and we in the diaspora can effectively make this positive change. I just want to make an announcement before I introduce the next speakers. We do have a 2K run tomorrow. So if you're like Usain Bolt, or you're like the Jamaican sprint, please be ready to be out in the morning, and I think there's an award if you're in the top 5. So let's be ready tomorrow at 8 in the morning. The next speakers will be talking about human rights in Uganda, combating torture and supporting survivors, and it's the role of the task, featuring Andrea Barron and Joanne Godetta. Andrea Barron has led task advocacy and outreach program since November 2013. She passionately works with survivors to advocate for human rights policies, particularly those in towards countries whose governments have perpetrated torture. Andrea plays a pivotal role in educating policymakers and the public on issues affecting survivors, including the affirmative asylum backlog. Andrea holds a master's degree in history from Boston College and has completed doctoral courses in government at the University of Maryland, College Park. She was an adjunct professor of history at George Mason University from 1999 to 2015. On the other hand, Joanne is a dedicated lawyer, has been a driving force in TASK's efforts to combat torture in Uganda. A graduate of Georgetown Law School, she served as legal and international counsel at TASK until recently. At TASK, Joanne represented torture survivors in the asylum proceedings and coordinated efforts to expand public awareness of torture and hold perpetrators accountable to their actions internationally. Her profound legal expertise and advocacy have contributed significantly to supporting survivors and seeking justice for victims of torture. Please, let's welcome the 2 wonderful speakers.
Hello everyone. My name is Andrea Barron. I'm the Advocacy Program Manager at TASK, the Torture, Abolition, and Survivors Support Coalition. It's a long name. And we just call it the Torture Abolition Coalition. And we're going to divide our presentation into 3 parts. I'm going to speak for 5 or 6 minutes about TASK and our mission. And then Joanne is going to speak for around 15 minutes about our report on torture in Uganda. And then I'm going to talk about U.S. policy on Uganda, focusing more on Congress And what I see is a way to press the Biden administration and Congress to move beyond rhetorical condemnation of the Museveni regime. You all might not like my ideas, but I'm going to tell you what they are. Yeah. Okay, so TASC was founded in 1998 by Sister Diana Ortiz and Ursuline Nunn, who was tortured and raped by the Guatemalan military in 1989, at a time when the U.S. supported the country's right-wing military dictatorship. So Uganda is not the only dictatorship that the United States has supported in its history. TASC's mission is to end the practice of torture wherever it occurs and empower survivors, their families, and communities. Just like we heard Bobby Wine say that he's a survivor, not a victim, we call our survivors. We don't say they're victims, they're survivors. Our TASC provides a variety of direct services to survivors in the D.C. area: free legal aid, social services, mental health support, and career development. Over 95% are from Africa. Most were persecuted because they were political activists in their country. Our legal department has 2 immigration attorneys and a paralegal with expertise in asylum law. The overwhelming majority of our survivors are affirmative asylum seekers, and we have a small number of defensive cases. Social services help survivors build on their strengths to develop a path to reach their goals, including their career objectives. The mental health program helps them cope with multiple traumas and losses in a safe, caring, and confidential environment. I'm going to focus now on the advocacy program, which I lead. Because TASC was founded as an advocacy organization to combat torture, and because we're only 20 minutes away from the U.S. Congress and the White House, we're located very close to Catholic University in D.C. Northeast. We're uniquely positioned to work with survivors and advocating for policies that matter to them. The advocacy program is national and also has some international components. So I work with both survivors in the DC area, and since the pandemic, we started working on Zoom with people all over the country, including a few Ugandans. A few people, most of them are from New York, New Jersey, California, Illinois. Is anybody here from Massachusetts? So that's my home state, Boston Strong! We use 3 criteria to decide what issues to work on. What policy issues do survivors care about? How can we have an impact? And what is our capacity to achieve a specific goal? During my first years of TASC, we concentrated on human rights abuses in the countries survivors are from. Mostly Ethiopia, Cameroon, and Eritrea, a few from Sudan and Uganda. In the last 2 years, we dedicated most of our time to our affirmative asylum justice campaign. Some of you might be aware there are thousands of asylum applicants, over 180,000, who are affirmative, which means they entered the U.S. legally with visas, and they've waited as long as 7 years for an interview with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Does anybody know about this? These are not the people who crossed the border. These are people who entered legally with visas and can't get an interview. People know about this? Okay, so if you have, this is apart from my regular speech, if you know anyone waiting more than 5 years for an interview, affirmative, they can email me at andrea@tasc.org and let me know. I particularly need some people from Massachusetts because we cannot get Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey to get with us until I find some Massachusetts people. But wherever you're from, only waiting over more than 5 years, okay? Please. So, up until TASC launched our campaign in 2021, with partners in New York City and California, nobody paid attention to these people. They suffered tremendously because of forced family separation, psychological trauma, fear of being sent back to their country. They have a well-founded fear of future persecution, They include torture survivors, rape victims, and persecuted members of the LGBT community. How does past advocacy work? We prepare survivors to meet with congressional aides in person or over Zoom to share their stories. Before the pandemic, we had about 70 congressional meetings a year. Of course, you all know these are not with actual members of Congress. They're with the aides, but the aides help make policy. So when you set up your meetings, don't feel badly if you can't meet with a representative or a senator. Most people don't. So now this year we only had 50 because of the pandemic, and next year hopefully we're back to 70. Our biggest success so far has been a letter on July 27th from 61 members of the House of Representatives sent to Burjadu, you never heard her name before. She is the director of USCIS and Homeland Security Mayorkas. And what we're trying to do is move all affirmative asylum seekers waiting more than 5 years to the front of the line. That's what we want. Now, this doesn't mean, thank you, I wasn't sure how many people here follow that issue about affirmative asylum seekers, but I know a lot of you are immigrants and you've been here a while. This doesn't mean that USCIS has to listen to them, but it's a big deal when you have 61 members of Congress. So we're bragging because Amnesty International gets those kind of numbers on their letters. We're a tiny little organization. So the torture survivors, me, my interns, so we're very proud that we got these 61 names of people. Thank you. So we work very, very hard. So, of course, now we're trying to get a similar letter on the Senate. Okay, so I think this is the part where I'm going to conclude my introduction to TASK. Now I'm going to introduce Joanne Yetter, who's going to speak about torture in Uganda. She was a volunteer at TASK when she's a volunteer lawyer, and she works much harder than many people paid for 40 hours a week.
Well, good afternoon. I am so honored to be here. You know, those years that I was working, it was behind the desk, with a computer screen in front of me, just sitting in my chair, working on these human rights issues in Africa, especially Uganda. To be with you who have lived experiences that have seen the impacts of persecution and torture, whether it's personally, or from family, or friends, or political colleagues. It's so meaningful for me to be here, and again, I really am honored. My work at TASK involved, as I think Andrea mentioned, representing dozens of survivors in the asylum office and the immigration court. We struggled together to get asylum for them. There's a terrible irony about TASK and asylum seekers. On one hand, we're usually successful, but on the other hand, usually successful is because our TASK members have typically suffered such terrible, horrendous persecution that their stories can't be denied. Now, my role was just to document their experience, put it in a good legal framework, and guide them through a very complicated legal administrative process. It was incredibly rewarding, to secure a life in the United States, one survivor at a time. But after a while, our then director, Leon Spignana, asked me to launch an effort for success to make such a bigger difference, but where the risk of failure is also much bigger. And that is in attempting to hold the perpetrators of torture and persecution accountable for their brutality. Now, when successes happen, it's spectacular. They can be punished financially, publicly vilified, made pariahs, imprisoned. It would send a strong signal to others as well, and hopefully deter them. Why is the risk of failure so great? Frankly, it's because the tools that we have in the United States for holding these individuals accountable are totally inadequate. One of them is the Torture Victim Protection Act. On paper, it looks great. A survivor of torture in the United States can sue in federal court against the perpetrator, but those victories, when they happen, are hollow. Because unless that perpetrator has ties to the United States, and even more importantly, assets in the United States that can be taken to pay damages, it doesn't really doesn't really amount to much. Task we tried to identify some of these perpetrators. We certainly had any number of torture survivors who could have been plaintiffs in those cases, but we just couldn't find the perpetrators that had the assets in the United States. So that really didn't work for us, and frankly, it rarely works for others. Second, cases can be brought to the International Criminal Court, and I'm not going to talk about this because we have Bruce Adler, who has done work that I admire beyond measure. We lawyers, we talk about evidence and we talk about argument, and this is the strongest evidence, the most powerful argument that could possibly be mounted. And all I can do is hope and pray that there is success in the end. Finally, there's the use of global Magnitsky sanctions against persecutors, and here's where task has made very, very concerted effort over a number of years. Andrea and I have personally worked very hard to build strong cases. Now, for reasons I'll explain, we can't talk about the specifics of our work, but this much I can say. We've submitted voluminous and I think ironclad evidence of the kind of serious human rights violations that the Global Magnitsky Act is supposed to do. And we've submitted, by the way, not just to the U.S. State Department, but also to the sanctions enforcement agencies in the United Kingdom and the European Union. And if all three of those governments agree to sanction, it can be the most powerful deterrent. Does it ever happen? Very rarely. Now, when a human rights group like TASC does submit a sanctions petition, it's not like a court case, it's a public record. We submit, and we have no idea what happens to it. It's the State Department, and they do their work, and we never hear back from them. And we look every week to see if one of our perpetrators has been sanctioned. Now that confidentiality is frustrating, but it makes good sense because you obviously don't want to tip off a perpetrator. So, hey, we're going after you, so they can then take your assets out of the United States and move them to their home country or Russia or China or somewhere where human rights violations are just fine. And also, I need to say more, we need to protect the safety of the brave individuals who give evidence to us. What this means is we never know the outcome of our cases. In Uganda, I'm going to be careful here, we know, for example, that Abel Candido was sanctioned a little over a year ago, I think. Whether, how, or TASC may or may not have played a role in that, we will never know. Now, it's interesting, the United States and the United Kingdom and the European Union, especially around the 2021 elections, have all come out and made statements condemning the human rights abuses that occurred around that election. But sanctions have not happened, except, I guess, in the one instance that I just mentioned. Now, Andrea's insight into U.S. foreign and military ties to Uganda and others, I'm sure, have spoken about those today with you or will later. Give hints into why sanctions against Museveni's henchmen have not taken place, even when they should, if they were based genuinely on human rights violations themselves. So how can we, at least at TASC, hold perpetrators accountable, given that there are legal avenues to do so? In the end, we looked to the court of public opinion, and that's the route that we took. All the evidence that we had, and the result was our comprehensive report on torture in Uganda. The report first summarized a long, tragic history, over 50 years history, of the widespread use of torture by any number of Uganda's leaders. It describes the physical and psychological impact the trauma of torture can have on its victims. And it counters directly the government argument that there are already avenues in Uganda for holding human rights violators accountable just within the system already. Then the real focus of the report was its absolutely unsparing, detailed account of the regime's brazen, and I mean brazen, use of torture to keep its hold on power since 2017. For this, we relied on many sources, the accounts of human rights organizations that are on the ground in Africa, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch in particular, the international press, and the BBC and Al Jazeera, I can say, have done a somewhat credible job. The US press has woefully fallen short. Public accounts by prominent Ugandan members of parliament, candidates, authors. But most importantly, we relied on the information we got from the people we call our brave citizen journalists. And they came to us as a result of, and young people in this audience, I can probably appreciate this more than I can, a secure online reporting platform that TASK established. And we used social media and word of mouth to get the information out. And the purpose of that was to collect information about torture and persecution in Uganda. And within 2 months, we received online reports of lawful imprisonment, torture, other abuses, from over 300 Ugandan citizens. 2 months, reports. And it wasn't even a well-publicized avenue for reporting. And from those, we took the testimony of 22 of those reporters who were willing to sit down with us and patiently and courageously describe the most unimaginable experiences in anyone's life. So with this rich and tragic information, we did our report on what is a systematic, and I emphasize systematic, use of torture and other serious human rights abuses in Uganda. The first of those was police attacks at public events. Now, some of these are so well known, I don't have to talk about the details. The 2017 attacks on members of parliament resulted in the arrest and torture of Bobby Wine and others. The 2018 attacks at, before, and after a political rally in Arua. The second set of systematic violations we found were attacks on journalists, especially intense persecution of journalists during and after the 2021 presidential campaign. 2 journalists were badly beaten just for reporting during the campaign. Many were kept away by force from public polling places on election day, and 20 were physically attacked by police, covering Bobby Wine's filing of a complaint at the Kampala UN office. 4 of them were hospitalized with serious injuries. And then the third and largest category that we looked at was police violence against ordinary citizens. And we looked at 2 groups, UDP and other opposition group activists and supporters, and gay and lesbian Ugandans. Now, hundreds had entered, as I said, their experiences in our online reporting system, and 20 of those their stories ended up in the report. About half of the individuals that we talked to and included in the report wanted their names to be in that report. They were willing to take the risk that in a public report, they could be exposed and then persecuted once again simply for working with us on the report. Another half, and typically those were individuals with families and children, perfectly legitimately asked that their words be anonymously reported, and we of course honored that. Now, I wish there was time to tell every one of their stories, and obviously there isn't, but these are ordinary citizens. They're just living their lives. They're just exercising the most simple rights that we in this country take for granted, of speech and assembly and association. And everyone that talked to us was either arrested, detained, tortured, their families threatened, a few were even disappeared. And all they were doing was attending rallies, standing on a street corner wearing a pro-UDP t-shirt, walking home from work after spending a day working at the polls, dragged out of bed in the middle of the night. And that's story after after story after story. In the end, the report was published in mid-2021, submitted to the African Union Commission on Human Rights. Since then, it has on the TEST website been downloaded over 400 times and has been viewed more than 25,000 times. And if you haven't seen it, please take a look. Its results were widely reported in Uganda and in a number of other African countries and their press outlets. Sadly, it got very little coverage in the United States. Human rights abuses in Africa never get the attention that they deserve. But we also know, and this was especially important to me as an old asylum attorney, that asylum attorneys across the country would use this report as part of their evidence in the asylum cases that they brought forward for their Ugandan clients. They must include evidence in those evidence packets of such dangerous country conditions in the individual's home country that they could not return home safely. And our report certainly demonstrated that. And then finally, I'll just note, at the time of the report, after the report was published, the regime continues its autocratic hold on Uganda. With no election campaigns in the last year, it seems as though human rights abuses may have tamped down a little bit. Maybe it was the sanctions against Candido, maybe the pending ICC case has chastened Museveni and his henchmen. Perhaps it's just easing up waiting for the next election campaign. And then just a few months ago, I was shocked. Museveni announced that his government was throwing out the UN Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights from Uganda. And why? He said that, well, and I quote, while there were some mistakes in handling people when they were being arrested, we corrected those mistakes. Does anyone in this room believe that statement? I certainly don't. But please know that there are those of us here in D.C., especially Andrea and our colleagues at TEST, who will keep the faith of the Ugandan people. And I'll be with her all the way. And I fear, I've talked a lot about the limitations, kind of the bad news, and how much we can accomplish with keeping the perpetrators accountable. But we all obviously have to keep trying. We will, and I know all of you will too. Thank you so much for letting me take the whole
Betty was suffering tremendously, but she never complained, not even once. But at the same time, we read the State Department human rights reports. We kept hearing about how the U.S. did not want to alienate Museveni because Uganda boasts the largest number of refugees in Africa, now 1.5 million, and of course because of its contribution to the African Union's mission in Somalia, now the African Union's transition mission in Somalia. The aid kept flowing to Uganda regardless of how many egregious human rights abuses were carried out. But then something changed in February of 2014. That was when Uganda passed the first infamous Anti-Homosexuality Act. This is where some of the controversial stuff comes in. The act mandated life imprisonment for gay sex, 7 years in prison for, quote, attempting to commit homosexuality, and 5 to 7 years in jail, and a $4,000 fine for, quote, promotion of homosexuality. The Obama administration decided Uganda needed to be sanctioned, even though it was a considerate of generous host for refugees and a reliable counter-terrorism party in Somalia. After the law was signed, Obama told Museveni that this law would, quote, complicate our valued relationship with Uganda and, quote, be a step backward for all Ugandans and reflect poorly on Uganda's commitment to protect the human rights of its people. Museveni refused to back down, claiming that Western criticism of the law was, quote, an attempt at social imperialism. But here is where Obama went beyond rhetorical condemnation. These were admittedly small steps, but at least they were concrete actions. And we kept hearing all weekend here about action. The Defense Department canceled an aviation exercise in Uganda. The State Department imposed a visa ban on officials involved with corruption and human rights violations against the gay population, a precursor to the Global Magnitsky Act. The Obama administration even planned on, quote, redirecting certain financial support for the Ministry of Health and allocating the $3 million it intended to use for a national public health institute to another African country. It also ended a $2.4 million community policing program for the Uganda police. All of these measures demonstrate that the U.S. can suddenly develop the political will to punish the Museveni regime. If they want, exactly. What happened after that? Museveni stopped objecting to Western social imperialism. And in August 2014, Uganda's constitutional court annulled the anti-homosexuality law. After the law was annulled, Uganda continued with its, quote, normal practice of attacking the political opposition. After the violence around the 2016 election, Human Rights Watch reported that the U.S., quote, raised serious concerns over intimidation and abuse during the elections, but there were no changes to U.S. policy, none. At that point, the U.S. was providing $440 million to Uganda for the health sector and $70 million to Amazon. Torture and abductions every year continued and went on and on. After the 2021 election, State Department Ned Price said the U.S. was concerned, that's what we call rhetorical condemnation, about a lot of issues. Sometimes the U.S. is concerned. Sometimes they're very concerned. They're greatly concerned, and they're deeply concerned. Well, they can be troubled, or very troubled, or deeply troubled, right? All rhetorical condemnation. And so, after the 2020 election, Ned Price said they're concerned about election irregularities and would consider a range of targeted options to hold accountable those members of the security forces responsible for these actions, but nothing happened. So, members of Congress have been more critical of Uganda than the State Department. Does anybody know off the top of your head which members of Congress have been most critical of Uganda? Anybody know? Senator Menendez? Anybody else? Cory Booker. 2021, after the election, Senator Booker and Republican Senator Jim Risch, both from the Foreign Relations Committee, sent a joint letter to Secretary of State Anthony Blinken expressing their grave concern, but they're not only going to talk about grave concern. Grave concern comes first. Grave concern about the state of democracy and ongoing human rights abuses in Uganda, but they also asked the State Department to review all non-humanitarian assistance to Uganda to ensure that it is not aiding or abetting corruption or human rights abuses. Uganda currently receives around $900 million in bilateral assistance from the U.S. $533 million is from USAID, combating HIV/AIDS, fighting malaria and tuberculosis. Very closely monitored. The $100 million is for food, and much of the rest is probably from the Defense Department. This information is classified, so we don't know exactly where it goes and how much it is. However, the U.S. must also approve World Bank funds that go directly to the government of Uganda. Here's Kareem, there he is. I remember I went on a demonstration with you guys, and then we also went to the World Bank. And I didn't really know that much about Uganda at that point. I said, why don't we go into the World Bank? And so, but that was the right thing to do, because I even had a red hat, which I did have, and I was worried it was going to fall off, so I didn't wear it today. But I do have my red hat. So the United States must also approve World Bank funds that go directly to Uganda. This money, in contrast to AID money, is not carefully audited and relatively easy to steal, which I'm sure a lot of you know. So one thing the U.S. could do could be more aggressive in determining how World Bank funds are spent in Uganda, since it's the largest contributor to the bank. So in December 2021, the U.S. did sanction Major General ADVOCACY. Joanne already talked about that. But most of what it was doing was still rhetorical condemnation. Now comes the other controversial thing I'm going to talk about. Then came the second anti-homosexuality law, signed into law in May 2023. It is the most severe anti-gay law in the world, even more punitive than the 2014 anti-gay law. Makes acts of homosexuality punishable by up to 20 years in prison, and mandates the death penalty for what is called aggravated homosexuality. Just like Obama did in 2014, this extreme anti-gay law has mobilized the Biden administration and members of Congress to punish the Museveni regime, which I know a lot of you are aware of. Biden said the U.S. may impose sanctions on Uganda and it would evaluate the implications of the law, quote, on all aspects of U.S. engagement with Uganda. That's an opening. That's an opening for advocacy in Congress. That one sentence, all aspects of U.S. engagement with Uganda. So what I'm going to be talking about is how can you use the condemnation of this law to expand U.S. condemnation of human rights and torture and corruption in Uganda. That's what I'm going to be arguing. So he also said this could apply to Uganda's eligibility for AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. Biden continued. Listen to the words he said. This shameful act is the latest development in an alarming trend of human rights abuses and corruption in Uganda. I'm going to say it again. Biden said, this shameful act, the Anti-Gay Act, is the latest development in an alarming trend of human rights abuses and corruption in Uganda. If he had not condemned the anti-gay law, he would not be talking about the other human rights abuses and corruption, right? So what's important for people to do is not just say, oh, they only talk about the anti-gay law. How can you use that to get the administration and Congress to expand their criticism of Uganda in every different way? Oh, thank you. I'm glad some people support that, because I know this is a little bit of a touchy issue. Okay, so Museveni claims that Western countries are exporting their values to Uganda, and that the anti-gay law reflects genuine Ugandan values. But what has actually happened in the last 20 years is that right-wing evangelical Christians in the United States, the same people whose friends might have stormed the U.S. Capitol in 2021, 15 minutes from my house, they have targeted Uganda for the picking. According to the well-respected Chicago Council on Global Affairs, I have 2 copies of this article here, if anybody wants to take a look at it. It's a very respected organization. What they said is that these extremist so-called American Christians decided to focus their anti-gay agenda on Uganda. They picked Uganda out of all the African countries. From 2007 to 2020, over 20 evangelical groups spent at least $54 million in Africa to influence, quote, law, policies, and public opinion on birth control, reproductive rights, and an anti-gay agenda. Nearly half was spent in one country, Uganda. Did anybody know this? So you can read this article. I only brought 2, but it's called The Unholy Relationship Between Uganda's Anti-LGBTQ Law and U.S. Evangelicalism. You can just go to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, put in Unholy Relationship, and you'll find it. Kareem, you were reading it. It's a good article, right? He has to say yes. Okay, so then in 2009, top American evangelical leaders organized a 3-day conference in Kampala to expose the homosexual agenda. That was when they laid the groundwork for the 2014. Okay. I'm almost done. The groundwork was laid for the 2014 anti-gay law. So this came from America. Those are American cultural extremists who were coming to Uganda. The last thing I want to talk about very, very briefly, and this is important, this is an amendment to something that's called the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA. And 2 members of Congress proposed this amendment. It didn't pass, but I want to summarize it very quickly what it is, because this is the direction I recommend that people go. So, the amendment says, from Congressman Bob Garcia and Congresswoman Rebecca Bolland, all funds to Uganda should be cut. All funds should be cut, including assistance in the form of equipment and training to coordinate joint training exercises, until the Secretary of State certifies that Uganda has taken 4 actions. So this is calling for a real aid cut. It's going beyond rhetorical condemnation. No more money for military assistance until Uganda investigates and prosecutes members of the UPDF who have violated human rights, until they establish that neither the police nor the UPDF are persecuting LGBT people. This is part of the package. It's part of the package. Next, establish that the police and the UPDF are protecting the rights of trade unionists, journalists, human rights defenders, critics of the government, faith and religious leaders, and other civil society activists. And that guarantees that the judicial system investigates, prosecutes, and brings to justice members of the police and the military who have committed human rights abuses. So, my last sentence is, I see 2 ways to have an impact in Congress. One is this incredible film that we saw last night, of course, to get it around to the public, to students, to Congress. And the other is to encourage members of Congress to not criticize them for attacking the anti-gay law, but say you want to build on it and expand it so that you condemn all human rights abuses and corruption in Uganda and take action to cut